Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the soundbites. Neither of my co-hosts are able to join me tonight, so it's just me and my guest, Meredith Angwin, who is a former project manager at the Electric Power Research Institute, and a repeat guest. Meredith, nice to see you.
Nice to see you again. Very happy to be here.
Yes, well, not only were we had dinner in Maine. Meredith and her husband George. We went and did some lobster last year. That was really cool.
That's right. We were all up there at the same time.
Yes, exactly. We love it there. Just lobster. Anyway, I guess it was a couple of weeks ago, I saw in the paper that you were holding a public presentation. It had a cute name to it. It was like Lunch and Learn, where people were supposed to bring their lunch and hear Meredith talk. And the topic was, are blackouts coming to New England, which definitely got my attention. I wasn't able to make the presentation, so I called up Meredith and asked her to please come on the show and talk about how she thinks within a few years our grid will probably have some rolling blackouts in the winter.
Yes.
Specifically. So before we really get started, I thought we should do some meanings of things, because you're sort of talking in a in a language that's not necessarily familiar to all of us. So what are rolling blackouts?
Rolling blackouts are when there's not enough electricity available on the grid, not enough power is available on the grid. So to keep the whole grid from losing frequency and failing, the grid operator shuts off power to an area. And they keep the power shut off for an hour and a half, depends, and then they turn it back onto that area, and then they put the power off to a neighboring area. Oh. So no area is without power for too long, but the blackout rolls from one area to another to another. I lived through that I mean, it's very survivable, but I lived through that in California. And although I was casual there, I said it's very survivable. Bible depends on what you are. I mean, it depends on if you're on a respirator. It depends if you're going up an elevator in a high rise. I mean,
are they able to tell us when, or it just happens and?
No, they know when.
Oh.
But at least when I encountered them and when I went through them, they do not tell anybody, because they feel that to announce that there be a rolling blackout will attract crime to the area.
Oh, of course. I didn't think of that. So I was just thinking of the people on the respirator, but...
I would think about that too. I know. I mean, I'm like, is crime more important than people? But I mean, I don't make those decisions. But the policy has usually been, it just happens.
Yeah, wow, interesting. So the other initials I saw that I had no idea, RTO and ISO New England, which I know we know here in Vermont, but what is RTO?
Regional Transmission Organization. In 1990, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission put down a ruling which said, if you want to, you can organize your power grid into a regional transmissional organization. Ours is ISO New England. And then if you go down to, if you go to New York, it's New York ISO. So these are the regional transmission, these are the multi-state, usually, power controllers.
Now, were you on the ISO board or still?
Oh, no, that would be wonderful, but no. What I was on is they have an advisory group called the Consumer Liaison Group, and I was on the coordinating committee for that advisory group for 4 years. There are not very many places where a single person can get to do any kind of advisory to an RTO organization. I mean, I'm sorry to say it's not.
So where does the advice and counsel come from?
It comes from something. Now it's time for the next acronym, NEPOOL.
Oh, I don't even. Oh, yes, I do. It's there, NEPOOL.
That's right. There's something called NEPOOL, and it has something called the Participants Committee. The Participants Committee is divided into 6 sectors, and end users are one of the 6 sectors, about 16% of the votes. And those 6 sectors put together proposals for how the grid is going to be operated.
Right.
So that consists of different generation operators, transmission operators, public power operators, all kinds.
Wow.
So we're only 1/6. In my talk, I said that's about 16%. So in my talk, I said we're 16%, and what do you get?
Exactly. So we do have representation on ISO and on some of these other boards, right? I mean, Vermont itself, or
Oh, well, I mean, for example, in the 16% of
Right.
the end user group, the Massachusetts Attorney General's office is a member. I'm pretty sure one of the Vermont offices is also a member.
must be.
But you understand that's the Sierra Club is also a member.
that's interesting.
No, it is interesting.
Yeah.
It's not even a unified group in terms of what it's trying to accomplish. But as I say, if you look at the group, the membership of it, it's all over the map.
Huh.
And when you put it all together, it's only 16% of the votes anyway.
I see. Well, I think it must be public service, the public service department, which now has another name, and I don't remember it. So.
Well, you know, I'd have to look that up.
that's
I've
okay.
been
That's
working on my book about the grid, and to some extent, I've been trying to get a little more big picture. Even though I live in Vermont, and I've
Right.
lived here for, many years.
Right.
But it's more important to me at this point that end users are such a small percent of the group, rather than whether Vermont has got its portion of end user.
Right. Oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. So the last definition I was hoping that we could talk about, they keep talking about the balancing authority.
Yes, every grid has to have a balancing authority, and the reason is that electricity is made and used pretty much simultaneously. In other words, there's no storage for electricity. If I go home and I turn on the heat, I've got a fuel tank in my basement, and that's where the fuel is stored, and that sits there until I turn the heat on.
Right.
But there's nothing like that for electricity. Electricity is made and used right then, right then, right then, right then. And so there has to be a balancing authority who's looking at how much electricity is being used and make sure that the right amount is being made.
Right. Well,
And that
makes
balancing authority does things like say, okay, you power plant, you turn on. Or later on, everybody's going to bed and the demand is
Right,
dropping.
right.
Okay, you power plant, you turn off.
And is that like, I'm just remembering sometimes we get messages like, please don't put on all the air conditioners on past, I don't know, I'm making up this, 5 o'clock. And that must, because we get these messages about usage, and whether that helps or not, I don't know. Oh, I can tell from your face.
Well, that gets into a real ball of wax.
Oh.
Let me explain. The fact is that the usage is highest in the summer.
Right.
And the different power plants make quite a bit of noise and advertisements and power walls, Tesla power walls. The idea is to, quote, beat the peak. In other words, that we will use less power at the peak. Now, you say, well, that'll save the grid. It actually, that's not why they're doing it. I'm sorry.
Why are they doing it?
They're doing it because transmission is a major cost on the grid.
Well, I knew it had to do with money, right?
And basically, ISO New England looks at their 1 hour of most use on the grid and which of the different utilities are using how much power, and assigns transmission costs according to that hour. So if you can beat the peak for that hour, if you can turn on your batteries for that hour, you can save $600,000 for your ratepayers or for your profits, whichever it may happen to be.
Let me think.
But the thing I'm trying to say is that people are under the impression that the grid is most stressed in the summer, and
Right.
it really, it has the highest usage in the summer, and it can be stressed in the summer. but it's most stressed in the winter.
Winter.
But beat the peak is always in the summer,
Yeah.
and it's greenwashed to say, oh, you're going to do something great for your neighbors. Yeah, you're going to save money for your utility company, which may be passed
thank
through
you
to
for that. You heard it here, folks. That's interesting. See, I actually believe them. What do I know?
No, well, of course. Yeah. I mean, look, please don't get me wrong. I'm being cynical here, but I mean, saving electricity is always a good thing.
Absolutely.
I mean, I go around turning off the lights in my house and making sure I turn off the water, the hot water when I, and make sure that my dishwasher goes on in the middle of the night because I can have a delay side. I mean, all that stuff.
Right.
I do it.
I hope we all do because I do it at home too. So.
But the thing is that I get a little annoyed when people think, oh yeah, and we've got to beat the peak, and I think your power company will love you.
Well, there you go, Green Mountain Power. That's it. So you talked about, well, when I was doing all this research and I was really just looking at the slides you had for your presentation, which was very interesting, by the way. And we're going to show some slides either at the end of the show or in between from Meredith's presentation. You'll find it very interesting. But each RTO, it says, has varying complicated dispatch rules, which sort of doesn't help the system as a whole because there's all these maybe competing rules. Is that
within an RTO? The dispatch rules are straightforward, but they're not straightforward, but they're consistent within the RTO.
But the RTO,
yeah,
right.
and basically they have to. The general theory is that you see what the load is, and you balance the amount of energy being produced to meet that load. And you have to think of some other things. You're supposed to do what's called economic dispatch. You dispatch the least expensive power plants first, so that only at the top of that supposedly keeps the costs down. When I say supposedly, it gets so complicated.
Right.
Okay, but if you were look at it in a straightforward way, if you dispatch the least expensive power plant first, then that keeps the costs down. So that's economic dispatch. You also have to look at where the power plants are and the load are. So, for example, sometimes we may need a lot of load. Okay, we may need a lot of power. But the lines are already full, bringing power to a city, and there's a wind turbine outside the city, and the wind kicks up, and the wind turbine says, "Okay, I'm ready. I want to get on the line." And the dispatcher says, "No, I'm sorry, we can't. The line is full right now. We can't. We don't have ability to tell that plant to close down quickly to put you on, and the plant, so what I'm saying is it's a very complicated situation. But
how many, I mean, I'm saying this all wrong, but how many grids could be working together talking about you should do this, you should do that, come down, come up? I mean, this must be so chaotic for whoever's calling the shots here to
well, I wish it isn't chaotic. I mean, it's actually quite wonderful. I call it the angelic miracle of the grid that they keep it in balance. It's just really, it's the biggest machine in the world. A power grid is. That's my feeling about it, and that the people keep it in balance. Now, this is where, if I could cue a slide, there's a slide of the ISO New England control room, and the control room has a board. It's huge. It's I don't know how to describe it. It's as tall as a wall, and it's around several sides of the room.
Right.
And on it are the major substations, the major power plants, and they all have signals on them on whether they're on, whether they're off, whether they're at top power. Then there are people managing it, the operators, and there are about I can't remember. I think there's 6 of them and 2 backups or something, because there's so many different things to think about.
Right.
And so that is the balancing authority. That is the balancing authority. They're the people who are making sure that it's matched, that the frequency on the grid isn't falling because there's too much load. They're doing all kinds of things.
I think I'd love to see something like that.
Well,
it must be
it'd
very
be
impressive.
great. There's a ISO New England has a PDF, I think it's called Running the Grid, which has pictures of this. And I really,
Oh, really? That's great.
You can download it from the ISO New England website, and it's about, I also asked when I was giving my talk, I asked ISO New England for a bunch of hard copies, and they sent them to me.
Oh, really? Great.
So people were really, really happy to take
Nice.
those home.
Oh, that's cool. We'll have to check into that. So we're talking about the grid, and there was a great story about how oil saved our grid last winter, which I thought was cool because we're always talking about oil in this state. But I still don't have, as much as I've talked to you, I don't have a picture in my head of what is the grid. This is the grid for the United States. I mean,
It's the
this
grid
is just for
New England. It's just
New
the
England.
grid for New England. It has connections to other grids. It has connections to Quebec, connections to New Brunswick, connections to New York, and connections to Long Island. Connections to upstate New York to receive power, and connections to Long Island to send power.
Wow.
And then it has connections to New Brunswick and Quebec. But basically, it is, in a way, an isolated grid. In other words, we could break off those connections if the other grids were having a lot of trouble, and we could just, and that happened one time at one point. I don't remember
Was that
the year.
the big blackout in New York that I was stuck in?
Yeah, but we were.
You know that elevator story you were talking about? I was in an elevator.
Oh, my Lord.
They had to lift us. It was a long story. I don't want to go into it, but they had to lift us out. They had the escape door on top, and they had to lift us out with a ladder. Very exciting. But anyway, that just was the whole East Coast, right?
Right, but I think that one of those blackouts, our grid operators disconnected us from the East Coast.
So we were okay.
So we were okay.
Yeah, but it sounds to me, maybe I'm wrong, it happens fast, doesn't it?
Yes.
I mean, all of a sudden, bam. That's
Yeah, they get a little warning, though. They can see it happening in other areas.
Oh, so that's sort of like a rolling.
Yeah.
Our turn next. That's great.
Well, the thing is, before it actually blacks out, I mean, they can see frequency aberrations and voltage aberrations. They can say, hey, it isn't working right. Something's going on. You know, so that's and they're very highly trained. And when you see if you get to visit that room where the balancing authority is, you look at it and say, wow, what a wonderful room. And it's true. It's one of three. They have another one
for New England.
For New England. Wow. They have a duplicate of it in the basement in case something happens to that, and they have another duplicate off-site.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, they are really do that, and plus which, those duplicates don't just sit there. They switch to each of the duplicates. I don't know the schedule, but about once a month, I think. But don't
make sure
quote me
everything's
on it.
working.
Make sure everything's working.
Well, I'm sure in this age of sabotage and terrorists and stuff, they're thinking about.
Oh, yeah, they have a cybersecurity thing too.
Yeah, I'm sure. It mustn't be easy to get in there, I bet.
No, you have to send your ID ahead of you, your information, so they can do a background check.
Right, I'm sure.
Then when you go to the guardhouse, you have to show it. It's like getting into a major power plant.
Right. Cool. So I was reading about ISO New England's winter reliability program, which was going on for a while until somebody decided it's not fuel neutral. And so you can explain this to us.
Oh, sure.
See, you should try me at home reading this stuff. What is this? I'm learning.
Okay, it's a complex. Okay. I remember I told you a few minutes ago that the grid is more stressed in the winter.
Right.
Okay. It's more stressed in the winter because we're so dependent on natural gas. 50% of our electricity is made by natural gas, okay, in New England. Well, in the summer, okay, they've got a lot of natural gas in the caverns and in storage, whatever. But in the winter, homes use natural gas for heating, especially, Connecticut, Massachusetts. We don't have a lot of gas hookups here in Vermont, but in the southern part of New England, plenty of gas hookups. And it's a cold snap. It's going down to 20 below here and 5 below there. The gas heating is going way up, and it's taking a lot of the gas. Now, the pipelines can only carry so much gas.
Right.
So homes have the priority. and the power plants can't necessarily get the gas. So all of a
That's not
sudden,
good.
there's the power plants couldn't go online because no gas. But the Winter Reliability Project, I mean, this is not an unheard of phenomenon, okay? And ISO New England was able to figure out a winter reliability project. And what it did was many gas-fired power plants can switch over to burn oil. So ISO New England paid for them to have oil on site. And then when they couldn't get gas, they switched to oil.
Right.
And so during the very big cold snap, most of the time the grid uses no oil. Some of the time it uses 2% oil. During the cold snap, it was up to 30 and 36% oil.
Wow.
This was not a trivial switch.
No, really.
Because,
That's a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that was the Winter Reliability Project. So now you say, but who made them stop? One of the issues that I have with RTOs is that the way they're set up, they're supposed to be what's called fuel neutral. In the old days, you could have a single utility, okay, and it could say to its PUC, I'm really happy because we have a nuclear plant here which is going to provide us with base load, and we're planning to build 2 gas-fired plants for peaking, and we've got some lovely hydro for load following. We've got a great mixed grid here, and it's super. And they would say, great. You know, the PUC would say, lovely, perfect. I love a grid with a lot of different
Diversification.
diversification. But the ISOs are not supposed to distinguish between one fuel and another. They're supposed to treat them all equally, which is obviously not actually possible.
Right, well, because they're different.
Because they're different.
Right.
I mean, the electricity that comes out is all the same,
Right.
because that's how you make electricity,
Right.
so that you can put it on the lines and it will go along with the other electricity that's already there. But the actual way the plants run is all different. But what happened was that FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, came over to ISO and they said, okay, you guys, I understand you got a problem up there in the cold winters, and you can use that fuel reliability for 3 years, and then it's over. You have to show us a program that is fuel neutral, that does not buy oil preferentially to other fuels. And
What is the rationale for this? Not hitting one industry over the other, or making one industry more profitable than the other?
supposedly, yes. But the thing is that I've been digging into this for a long time. Okay, and most people don't dig into it because it's not very easy to see what's going on. For example, remember I was telling about the Participants Committee in FERC and
Right.
Newspaper people are not allowed there.
Oh, that's
Okay,
interesting.
you
Right.
only find out what FERC is going to. Oh, I'm sorry, not FERC. Sorry, at RTO, the NEPOOL. Please forgive me. Remember the NEPOOL Participants Committee. The people have sued to try and get newspapers to cover. Anyway, they don't cover it very much. But at any rate, my experience is that, as you would expect, with a situation where there are 6 sectors of different kinds of industries. This is what you call in the political world pressure groups, right?
Right.
And they are trying to arrange the way that electricity is bought and sold to benefit
Their
them.
benefit. Big surprise.
A big surprise. This is not a conspiracy theory.
Right.
This
No,
is
it's
just
good business,
It's
right?
good business.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, if your company sends you to the meetings of the Participants Committee, they expect you to stick up for their their interests.
Right, for sure. Right.
So what I'm saying, though, is that what I'm seeing, what I've noticed is the theory that everything is fuel neutral is belied by the very political experience of how the participants committee makes things happen.
Interesting.
I mean, Pat, you
sounds like Montpelier.
That's what I was going to say. I was a chemist and a materials person, and then when I got a little higher up in my career, I had to know about things like the Clean Air Act and stuff. But I started out, I wanted to know about, chemistry.
Right.
Give me a couple of good molecules. I love it. And so to some extent, I've had a little bit of a struggle with the whole political aspect.
Yep.
But I would tend to say that at this point, the people, the groups that are doing best with the current set of rules are gas-fired plants.
Interesting.
And there's a paper that I quoted in my other talk called Asymmetric Risk, and it basically shows that the way it's set up now, the gas-fired plants have the least risk.
Interesting. I know I don't want to use up
my
too much time,
goodness.
but how? No, we're fine. Why is that? What does the gas?
Well, the reason
is it cheaper to run?
No, it's not cheaper to run. Everybody thinks that it's cheaper to run. I mean, it's cheaper than some plants, but the main thing is that around here, because electricity, let me see if I can start. Back in the old days, if you owned a power plant, you were part of a utility that not only owned that power plant, but owned the transmission lines and did the billing, okay? And you would go to your PUC, and assuming you were keeping up the plant correctly, and you didn't have a lot of outages so that they weren't fining you for outages, then you would get a guaranteed rate of return on your investment to keep things going. So utility in those days was a good widows and orphans stock because they had a guaranteed rate of return, okay?
Nice.
And then people said, well, if we could just get the market involved, then we would save money. And that's a really good theory, and I like free markets, but what has happened with this market is it's become, the rules are being shifted by the different interest groups to the point where I don't consider it a market very much at all. Well, meanwhile, back to your question about why do I say the gas plants are doing the best. When let's say you have a nuclear plant that runs all the time. It gets two kinds of payments. Well, let's start with the grid, maybe. This is very complicated, and I'm so sorry if I'm not saying it well.
No, that's okay. It sounds to me like people want predictability. Is that part of this equation? That they want to make sure that everything's predictable.
Right. Now, if you have let's look at you have a gas plant. You own your gas plant, and the nuclear plants, or in the old days the coal plants, they're making base load power. They're going all the time.
Right.
So you are called on when that operator says, hey, the demand is going up, get on the line, okay? Now you own that gas plant. You don't know how much you're going to be called on. You don't know what the other plants are in the grid that will be called on at the same time, so you don't know what they'll pay you. The payment depends on the situation and the auctions that are going on the grid every 5 minutes. So you don't have a guarantee.
Where you're buying different power sources.
That's right. The distribution utility is buying different power sources, and you're sitting there with a gas plant, and you don't know how much it'll run and how much it will be paid. So you might say, I think I'm not going to keep this plant up. I'm just taking it off the grid. I mean, I don't think I can make money with this thing. Okay? Well, all of a sudden that was looking pretty bad. So now
Right.
Everybody gets paid a capacity payment. That is,
Aha.
if you will keep your plant up and you have it available, if we say, hey, we want you to get going, then you get a payment whether you make any power that month or not.
Oh, interesting.
You
Huh.
don't,
Is that what they, because I know when they said stop the winter reliability program that they switched over to a pay for performance, and is this?
that's right. This is
it,
what
right?
they were trying to do. Well, no, the capacity payments were there before.
Oh, okay.
Okay. The pay per performance was basically, they said, well, what we're going to do is if we say to plant A, you go online, and it says, sorry, I can't, we're going to take some of its capacity payment and give it to a plant that went
can.
on, that did go online.
Right.
So that plant will now have supposedly an incentive to go
Right,
buy some
right.
oil without without the grid operator actually saying, go buy some oil.
Interesting.
Because if the grid operator says, go buy some oil, they're naming the fuel. They're playing favorites. But
Oh,
if
my
they
God.
say, we're going to fine you if you don't go online, then supposedly that plant is going to go buy
because
some.
they don't have any other choice.
Well, they do. Of
Oh,
course
they
they do. Because they don't know, just like they don't know how much they'll be paid for their
Yeah.
power,
Wow.
they don't know whether the grid is going to get into some kind of trouble where they're
I see.
going to get that fine.
Right. Wow.
You know, it's sort of like if you're in some cities of the world, it's kind of weird, but you get on the bus and it's free, except that every now and again someone swoops through and sees if you've got a ticket.
Right. Wow.
And you see, the thing is, it's sort of the same for this plant. Well, I won't keep any oil on site. It may happen I get
You
caught.
gotta
by-
really know what you're doing, these plant manager people.
Oh, yeah.
Good grief.
But the thing is, you see what they're doing. You see what all this is going on. It's all about the different plants trying to game the system for their own thing. I mean, have I been telling you anything about how they're trying to improve their performance or how they're trying to
No,
use?
it's about money.
Well,
Yeah.
it's just, but the thing is, back in the day of regulated utilities, they could spend more of their time on maintaining their plants and less on predicting whether or not they should keep oil on site and so forth and so on.
And I don't know if we have the time, but now I know Green Mountain Power, they're always looking for, I don't know how you refer to it, wind and alternative sources, which must really put a monkey wrench in something.
Oh, it's
because-
very difficult.
Yeah, I would think so, with water and the Hydro-Quebec, and there's just so many other things that people are looking at to, you know, the Green Mountains and to save the planet, et cetera.
Yeah, that's
Which is important, bad, better throw that in before I get killed. But
no, you know, the thing is that I don't like to spend a lot of time on how renewables make
Oh, it's
operating the
renewables, thank
grid.
you.
Intermittent renewables make operating the grid harder.
I would
Because
think,
you
right.
see, the thing is that once upon a time, you could say, the demand has gone up, so let's turn that plant on. Now you've got plants that turn on when they want to. That is, the wind started blowing, I'm on.
right,
And what if there's another plant on?
yeah.
Do you tell it to back off?
Do they have storage capabilities?
no storage?
they don't.
Nobody has storage capabilities. I mean,
So it
that's-
goes from the wind power right to the plant or into the lines?
Yes, unless it's what's called curtailed, which means that the grid operator says, we can't take your power now, and then they feather the blades of the wind turbines so that it doesn't make power to go online.
Wow. Because I know a couple of people that actually sell their power to the grid
Yes,
because they've got more than they need for their home, and so they're able to.
that's
to
right. That's
sell-
the net metering
Yeah,
programs.
right.
Yeah.
This is very confusing, but rather fascinating, I must say. So you've talked about the pay for performance. We talked about the incentives, which are out there now. and I have a whole thing here about how the grids got started and all that different, and when the RTOs were formed, which probably is too much information to know.
Yes, I know.
So what do we have here in Vermont? We should let folks know what we're dealing with here in Vermont. I know we read that we have a hybrid system.
Well,
of
we have a
sorts.
kind of hybrid system because most of the area, if you're a company that owns power plants, you don't own distribution and send bills. You bid your power plants into the auctions, you get paid that way, and then the distribution utility pays you for your power and bills the customer.
Yeah.
But in Vermont, Green Mountain Power is both. That is, they own power plants. Well, they own wind turbines and things. We don't really have much in the way of power plants in the state, and they also bill the customer. But one thing I wanted to get to, I don't mean to take.
No, please go right ahead.
The thing is that I had this very, should I call it clickbait? Sure.
Go right ahead.
A kind of provocative title about rolling blackouts coming to this area. And the question is, so why would they be coming to this area? And the answer is basically that we have a grid that's overly dependent on natural gas. We don't have new pipelines to bring in more natural gas. We've been assuming that we can import power and natural gas from Canada, but some of the Maritimes gas fields are not as strong as they used to be. What I'm trying to say is, ISO New England did a forward-looking set of scenarios, and they would not like me to call them predictions because they say, we looked at this and we looked at that. A prediction is this is what's going to happen.
Right.
But they did a set of scenarios of what would happen if a compressor failed on a major pipeline, if Mystic Station near Boston went offline, if different kinds of things that they looked at, and also for good things. We build more renewables, we import more LNG, okay? And they did 23 scenarios, and in 19 of them, rolling blackouts happened.
Oh, wow.
So you could say, well, maybe they should have chosen different scenarios. I think that they were choosing the best scenarios they could.
I was just going to say, I'm sure they didn't pick scenarios that are too far out there to happen, right?
No, they didn't.
Picked the real things.
They picked the real things, and people got very upset and made them do a bunch more scenarios. But when you get right down to it, in the bunch more scenarios and in the original 23, there are plenty of them that show rolling blackouts in 2025. Wow. And as I say, ISO New England would not like me to say, hey, we're predicting.
Right.
They're not predicting. They're just saying there are many circumstances in which this looks likely to happen.
Now, I know that you have given some recommendations for how to fix, and I quote, the overpriced fragile grid. But where have we put these? You've got time to do it.
Okay, gosh, now I've got to solve all the problems. I like spread.
I bet you do. I've got them written right here, but in NEPOOL's in this discussion too, right?
Yes. The thing is that the buck doesn't stop anywhere. ISO New England does its best to keep the grid going, to take care of problems that arise, to encourage transmission for reliability, transmission lines to be built for reliability, and so forth. But when you get right down to it, ISO New England cannot command anybody to do things very much. Now, meanwhile, a generator, let's say I own, remember I had that gas plant I was telling you I
Yeah,
owned.
right,
it.
right.
I don't own a gas
I bet
plant.
we couldn't even build one here in Vermont anymore.
No, you couldn't. But
Yeah.
what I mean is, let's say that there's a gas plant owner, and it turns out that he's kind of bored with being a gas plant owner, and he's not keeping it up anymore. And when the grid operator calls on him, he can't go on. Well, he'll have to pay a fine to pay for performance, but beyond that fine, there's no blame. I
Right,
mean, he's
right.
not responsible for keeping the grid going. That's not his problem.
Whoa.
His problem is to keep his plant going to make money on it. You see, the thing is, in the old days, with the rate of return, the rate of return looks like a freebie, and it was to some extent. But they did have the responsibility, the complete responsibility, that the grid in their area kept providing power to anybody. If they had a power plant go down and they couldn't replace the power easily, they would probably get fined by their PUC.
Yeah. I would think as a customer we would like that approach.
Well, yeah.
That they can't just slough it off.
Let me also say that there are studies, not many, but a couple. This doesn't seem to be studied a lot, but the RTO areas tend to be more expensive than the non-RTO areas.
Right. Yeah, I had noticed that, and I wasn't sure what the reason was for that.
Well,
They're getting away with it.
Well, it's a complicated reason, but basically, I would put it that if you are in an area where nobody's really responsible, then everybody, the grid operator is going to almost have to encourage a great deal of redundancy.
Mm-hmm.
You see, if there was redundancy in the old system, the company that owned it could say, yeah, we've got 30% more power than we need, but if the grid, it's just going to be very redundant.
Right. Now you've talked about maybe bringing back, or you said go back to integrated utilities and public utility commission. That would be the power, that people overseeing everything, right?
Right. That would be the Public Utility Commission overseeing the company that owned both the power plants and the distribution, and giving them a rate of return and fining them if they weren't doing their job right.
Yes, as you said before, the buck would stop with them, right? That's where
the buck
stops.
would stop there.
Yeah.
The buck stops nowhere.
Wow. I'm not sure I like that. Everybody's got to report to somebody.
Yeah. Well, you know, the buck just basically doesn't stop anywhere. Nobody has to worry about the responsibility. Nobody has it.
Huh. Oh, that's sort of, and then you talked about that the grid needs, I just like some of these recommendations, need sunshine laws.
Yes.
So that they would be reviewed and looked at and adjusted, right?
It's a very, in my opinion, it's a very insider's situation. And I want to also say that the insiders are very good people. I mean, they're going there to defend the interests of the company that pay them.
Right.
But I just, you know, when I begin bashing at NEPOOL or stuff, I keep thinking, oh, the people I've met, they're
so nice, right?
They're
well,
so nice.
Right.
I just don't want to give the impression that there's a bunch of people out there who are running the grid and going, well, ha, ha, ha. You know, they're not.
No, I wouldn't think so, because that's a pressure job. You don't do it unless you really like it.
Yeah,
I would think.
Yeah, no, no, the balancing authority people, the people running the people balancing supply and demand, they are extremely well trained, extremely level-headed, and very professional and very good. What I'm talking about is the people in NEPOOL that are proposing new rules for how things get dispatched and paid, and they are defending their companies. They want to make those rules mean my company gets more money, and I'm just trying to point out that they are good people. They're I just wanted to say that. I also I wanted to say something else. Remember I told you about, I don't know how much time
Oh,
we
we're
have.
fine. I'm checking it out.
Okay.
There. We're good.
I wanted to talk about Paper Performance, which had a little outing that didn't work very well. Okay, on Labor Day 2018, it was hot and it was humid. It was hotter and more humid than ISO New England had predicted. And that means air conditioners were running more. And so ISO New England was pulling as many power plants on the grid as it could. It was taken a little aback.
Right.
And then Mystic Station went offline. And that's a really big power plant. And at that point, the prices on the grid, which usually run between $20 and $80 per megawatt hour, ordinarily go up to $200 or $300 when the grid is, maybe $400 when the grid is stressed. They were up at $2,000.
Oh my God.
It was just wild.
Oh wow.
And so the grid was totally stressed, but our balancing authority people, the guys in the control room, the people in the control room, fabulous job. And
Got it under control.
Most people didn't even notice, you know. I would say most
Well, they
people,
must have done a yeoman's work to get that 2,000
Oh, yeah.
balance down to what we normally pay.
Right, and basically they were pulling in power. They were telling people in New York, the New York ISO had to begin putting new plants online because so much of the New York power was coming over to the New England ISO. It was.
And why did that original plant go offline, by choice or just
No,
something
not by
happened?
choice. Something happened.
Something
I think.
happened.
You know, if it was by choice,
that's a bad.
that would be bad. I don't even know.
We need that overarching person.
But the thing that I want to tell you about it is that after all the dust settled, a Paper Performance was supposed to settle between the plants that didn't perform and the plants that did. Okay, it was supposed to transfer money from the plants that didn't perform to the plants that did. And so now the Paper Performance formula was worked out in a series of committees by NEPOOL and ISO and FERC. And a funny thing happened. They paid out $8 million more than they collected. So
where was that money coming from?
Well, they just had to
we're
do
talking
another.
like Washington.
No, they had to do another assessment of all the power plants to raise the $8 million.
Oh my
But
word.
what I'm trying to say is, that isn't a really good way to.
You don't think that's a pay for performance thing? Yeah. Wow.
I mean, in other words, if it makes me uneasy, if you have a winter reliability program, I can tell you that there are power plants in New England that have oil stored on site. There it is. There's
Right,
the oil.
right.
We can turn it on.
Right.
If you have Paper Performance, does this make you feel comfortable that this is the kind of thing that's going to incentivize plants to keep oil on site?
I see. Right. I get it. So how long have they been doing this pay for performance?
Since June 2019.
Oh, so that's not too long. Maybe they'll.
No,
with
2018.
With
yeah.
some experience, they'll figure it out. Maybe there's
Well,
a better
what
way.
they're doing is you see, it's a series of Band-Aids. Now they're trying to. Now they're trying to fix Paper Performance. You see, they always want a new fix.
Your recommendations, in summary, are that you should go back to the integrated utilities and public utility commissions, that the ISO needs to have more planning authority, and the NEPOOL, which is the New England Power Pool, needs to have less authority.
That's my feeling.
So there you go. So pay attention out there. Tell us, we just have a few, I want you to tell us about your book, the book you're writing now, or ready to go to publishing?
Well, it's in between writing and publishing. I'm working very hard. I self-publish, but I actually send it to a group of people who do the page design and they copy edit it and stuff. The name of the book is Shorting the Grid, and basically it's about how the RTO areas are costing money and leading to fragile grids. Wow. And I think it's a tremendously important topic. And The trouble is, it's extremely difficult to explain. If I said to you, I like nuclear, or I don't like nuclear, or I like solar, or I don't like solar, you know what I'm talking about. If I tell you, what do you think of the NOPR rules that they're putting in PJM now?
Well, maybe not.
Exactly.
Right.
There's a lot of obfuscation that comes with the terminology of the auctions.
Right.
And plus which, even, you know, even if you wanted to do something, you got about half of 16% to
Yeah, right, to switch, to balance it out the vote. That's not
right.
there.
That's right.
Whoa. Well, you have your hands full here.
Well,
I hope you're going to give this presentation around different places, or was that just?
No, I'm willing to do that, but right now, my aim is, George and I have scheduled a little vacation right after Valentine's Day. We cannot go on vacation at Valentine's Day because he sings barbershop quartet.
Oh, that's right. He told me that over the summer. Great.
Yes, he goes around with singing Valentine's.
Oh, you're kidding! That's so cool. Is that here in Vermont?
Yes, it's in Vermont,
nice.
New Hampshire. So we can't leave until after Valentine's Day.
What a cool thing to do.
But after that, we're going to go on a little vacation. So
Good.
I'm planning to have my book over to the people who do the page layout and the copy editing and so forth before we go. I really hope so.
That's great. Now tell them about your first book that we talked about it on this show because it's something that everybody can use for.
I agree.
Yeah, no, it was I read it. It was really interesting. I thought for sure that you wrote it. It may be a little over my head, but it was a great book. It really was excellent.
I try not to write over people's heads.
Well, it's not too hard to do that on my head, but it was
anyway,
a great book.
Okay, the name of the book is Campaigning for Clean Air, Strategies for Pro-Nuclear Advocacy. Nuclear power makes, I believe, 50 to 60% of the clean power in this country, much more than hydro makes and much more than wind makes. And so if you really want clean air, if you don't want combustion processes for your entire grid, you really have to keep your nuclear plants and build some more of them. If you don't, if you like, sometime you can go to something called the electricitymap.org, and you can see all over the world who has the least CO2, least combustion systems power, and it's places like France with nuclear and Ontario with nuclear and hydro.
Right.
And so it's worth seeing. So I wrote that book to encourage people to take part. A lot of people say, yeah, I like nuclear, and then they're like, what are you going to do about it? Nothing. So I have a section called Advocacy for the Shy, about how to write a letter to the editor.
Right. Well, we told them it was just like campaigning. I mean, you could use a lot of the stuff you have in that book, how to run your campaign.
Yes.
Right? And how to protest. And
Yeah, I agree. It really is about campaigning. The title is campaigning, but this is campaigning for clean air rather than for a political figure, a candidate.
That's great.
But the idea is the same. You want to be out there. You want to be credible. You want the public to know that you're out there. I mean, sometimes there were so many anti-nuclear protests going on that I considered it a win if instead we had enough people out there that were pro-nuclear, people like myself, who said the reporter would say, pro and anti-nuclear people showed up at the State House or whatever, instead of like big protests at the State House against nuclear. It was pro and anti-nuclear.
That's good. Well, that book was great. I really enjoyed reading it. So, Meredith, we've run out of time, and I'm going to say thank you because I have to introduce our mutual friend.
Oh,
You think that all this is very serious stuff, and it is. And whether you're pro or con, this whole issue is serious business. But there's one guy. His name is Eric Meyer. He is the founder and executive director of Generation Atomic, a nuclear advocacy nonprofit company. And before you rinse your face, he started out pursuing a career in professional singing, but somehow switched to advocacy for nuclear reactor. Go figure. But you have got to see what this man does with combining both his singing and his advocacy for nuclear power. I'm going to introduce you to, who's this guy? Eric.
Eric.
Have you met him?
Oh, of course, many times.
You have to introduce me somehow. Anyway, thank you all for listening.
A team of scientists led by Mr. Walterson had built a breeder, unlocked the energy within. Enrico Fermi saw everything that could be. We switched the breeder on and the neutrons made photons. Clean power forever within our grasp. By splitting atoms, it's come to pass. Tomorrow will be so great. Clean power forever will be our fate. December 20th, 1951. Our dreams of fission had only just begun. Nuclear now makes 60% of our clean energy, saving 2 million lives just in this last century. Clean power forever within our grasp. By splitting atoms, it's come to pass. Tomorrow will be so great. Clean power forever will be our fate. Clean power forever will be our fate. Clean power forever will be our fate. Clean power forever will be our fate.